Daniel Cross's cardboard box held more than belongings. It held the truth. They never saw the box in his hands felt heavier than it should have, though it held only a plant, a framed photo, and 11 years of his life reduced to cardboard. Daniel Cross stood on the marble steps of the building he had once led, his phone pressed to his ear, and in a voice that trembled with something far more dangerous than anger, he said 3 words that would end careers before lunch. Fire every one of them. Behind him, on those same marble steps, 3 people he had trusted laughed like children who believed they had gotten away with something. They had no idea what Daniel already knew. They had no idea who was listening. They only knew that Daniel Cross, the man who had built Ashcam Logistics from a small garage into a 9-figure company, had just been escorted out by security while they pointed and laughed as if he were the final punchline to a joke they had been telling for years. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance and that quiet, humble people should never be underestimated, take a second to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who could use a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. This story is about to prove that karma keeps better records than any spreadsheet ever could. 6 months earlier, 6 months before that unforgettable morning, Daniel had been a different man. Or at least that was what he kept telling himself. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving him with a 7-year-old daughter named Lily and a company that no longer felt like his own after the board welcomed outside investors. He poured every ounce of energy into keeping both alive, the little girl he loved more than anything and the business he had spent more than a decade building. He sacrificed sleep. He drifted away from friends. He slowly lost the version of himself who used to laugh without thinking. Every morning, Daniel packed Lily's lunch and tucked a handwritten note inside her lunchbox. Every evening, he returned home so late that the little note was often the only conversation they had shared all day. He kept telling himself it was only temporary. He believed the sacrifices would eventually pay off once the company found its balance again. What Daniel failed to notice, because he was so focused on surviving, was the quiet damage happening all around him. Marcus Webb, the company's chief operating officer, had spent an entire year carefully building relationships with the new investors. Behind closed doors, he planted seeds of doubt about Daniel's leadership. He described Daniel's exhaustion as incompetence. He portrayed grief as weakness. Slowly but surely, those stories became accepted as truth. Priya Chen from finance and Rebecca Hall from operations eventually joined Marcus. At first, they were not driven by cruelty. They were driven by ambition. The kind of ambition that convinces decent people to make one small, selfish decision after another until those decisions become habits they can no longer recognize. They watched Daniel struggle to balance being a father and running a growing company. Instead of offering support, they quietly convinced the board that Daniel himself had become the company's biggest problem. The 4-minute meeting that changed everything. The termination meeting lasted exactly 4 minutes. There was no discussion about severance, no words of appreciation for 11 years of sacrifice, no acknowledgement that the company existed because Daniel had built it from nothing. Someone simply pushed a folder across the table. Security was already waiting outside. Daniel walked past his own name still displayed on the company directory. He walked past employees who suddenly found the floor more interesting than meeting his eyes. Then he stepped outside onto the marble staircase. Marcus, Priya, Rebecca. All 3 were standing there, not because they wanted to comfort him, not because they felt guilty. They were there because they wanted to watch. They wanted proof that it had really happened. Rebecca laughed first. Priya quickly joined her. Marcus pointed toward Daniel as though he were a stray dog being chased away from someone's yard. None of them realized that the phone call Daniel made a few seconds later was not to a lawyer. It was not to a friend. It was to Eleanor Voss. The secret they never knew existed. Eleanor Voss lived quietly and rarely appeared in public. She was the founder of Meridian Capital. 5 years earlier, Meridian Capital had provided the investment that allowed Ashcam Logistics to expand across the country. Almost nobody inside the company knew the complete details of that partnership. What they certainly did not know was that Eleanor was Daniel's late wife's aunt. She had watched Daniel grieve. She had watched him raise Lily by himself. She had watched him sacrifice almost everything for a company that had just discarded him without hesitation. When Daniel explained what had happened, his voice shook, not because he was furious, but because he was emotionally exhausted. Eleanor listened quietly. When he finished speaking, she asked no questions. She simply replied, "I've been waiting for a reason." Within 72 hours, Meridian Capital activated a governance clause buried deep inside the original investment agreement. The clause granted Meridian emergency authority whenever executive leadership changed without proper board consensus. Marcus Webb had never bothered reading that section of the contract. He had been far too busy planning his promotion to notice the trapdoor beneath his own feet. By Thursday morning, an emergency board meeting had been scheduled. By Thursday afternoon, Marcus Webb, Priya Chen, and Rebecca Hall were being escorted out of the very same building. They walked past the same company directory. They stepped down the same polished marble staircase. This time, no one laughed. A little girl's lesson. But this story was never really about revenge. Daniel understood that better than anyone. The night after losing his job, he sat on the living room floor, still wearing his wrinkled suit. The cardboard box remained unopened beside him. Lily quietly climbed into his lap and looked at him with worried eyes. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Why are you so sad?" Daniel chose honesty. He explained that sometimes the people who are supposed to stand beside you are the very ones who hurt you the most. Lily listened carefully. Then she smiled in the simple way only children can. "When kids are mean at school," she said, "my teacher says the best revenge is becoming someone even better." Daniel wrapped his arms around his daughter. In that single moment, Lily gave him more wisdom than every board meeting he had attended during the previous decade. Building something better. Although the board later begged Daniel to return as chief executive officer, he politely declined. Instead, he asked Eleanor to help him create something entirely new, something smaller, something honest, something that truly belonged to him. Most importantly, something built around values instead of politics. He named the company Lily & Co. It was another logistics business, but it operated very differently. Every employee received meaningful family leave. Mental health support was treated as a necessity rather than a luxury. People who struggled were offered compassion instead of humiliation. Managers were trained to help rather than judge. Success was measured not only by profits, but also by how people treated one another. The results surprised almost everyone. Within 1 year, many of Ashcam Logistics' most respected employees resigned and joined Lily & Co. These were the workers who had always admired Daniel, but had remained silent during his firing. Several of them admitted they regretted saying nothing that day. They apologized sincerely. Many even asked Daniel for another opportunity. Daniel never refused, because he understood, perhaps better than anyone else, what it felt like to need a second chance. Karma doesn't need an announcement. Marcus Webb, Priya Chen, and Rebecca Hall never completely rebuilt their professional reputations. Business communities are often smaller than people realize. Stories spread. The story of 3 executives mocking a grieving single father on the front steps of the company he created quietly traveled from interview rooms to executive meetings and from boardrooms to networking events. It became less of a scandal and more of a warning. Yet Daniel never mentioned them publicly. He never celebrated their downfall. He never used social media to embarrass them. He never tried to destroy what remained of their careers. He simply moved forward. He had Lily. He had a purpose that meant more than any corporate title. And for the first time in years, he had built a life where success and kindness could exist together instead of competing against each other. A final thought. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness, patience, and integrity are never wasted, even when life seems determined to punish you for showing them, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who may need this message today. Your support helps this channel continue sharing stories that inspire hope, courage, and compassion with people around the world. Before you leave, there's one final request. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been laughed at by people who failed to recognize your value, type the word RISE in the comments below. Let this community see just how many people have walked that difficult road and come back stronger. Daniel Cross lost his job on those marble steps, but what he found afterward was far greater. A daughter who believed in him without question. A new purpose built from the ashes of betrayal. A company founded on compassion instead of fear. And a life finally lived according to his own values. In the end, that was worth far more than any title, office, or corner suite could ever be.